Have you ever heard of RPG Toolkit? RPG Toolkit came out during a time when all we really had for game makers widely and publicly available was RPG Maker, as always, right? In fact, I'm pretty sure back in the Paleolithic age, we had a version of RPG Maker in which cavemen etched shapes and words onto walls made of stone using stone tools. I found RPG Toolkit back in sometime in the 2000, early 2000s, 2000 or 2001. And I told this story before when playing one of the games built in RPGWizard, but I found that it addressed everything that I could possibly have wanted in an engine or any kind of RPG middleware. It answered so many questions that I hadn't even asked yet. I learned how to use RPG code, and that arguably was my first foray into scripting and got me motivated to learn more about coding in general because it introduced concepts to me that are building blocks and foundations of code that I found highly rewarding right away. RPG Toolkit doesn't really work that well on current 64-bit platforms. In fact, I can't get it to work, any of the games rather, to work at all on my current build. Even though you can go download version 3.2.1b of RPG Toolkit from rpgtoolkit.net, you are much better going and downloading RPGWizard. RPGWizard is a fork of RPG Toolkit made by Swordmaster. Now, version 1.71 is available today. However, there is some bad news. As of September 1st, Swordmaster 2K actually has decided to stop development of his fork of RPGWizard, which means there will be no future updates. I'd like to read the post that he made in his Discord server verbatim. It is addressed at everyone. This is an important announcement about RPGWizard. I have decided from today to cease all development of the RPGWizard engine. This was not an easy decision for me to reach. Unfortunately, I have come to the conclusion that I no longer have the same motivation that I did when I first started this as a fork of the RPG Toolkit. While I had been working on the second version of RPGWizard, that will now never be released. I feel that the game engine ecosystem has changed dramatically since the days of the RPG Toolkit back in the late 90s and early Zeds. Now, there are far more capable game engines with much larger communities that I feel make an engine like the RPGWizard no longer needed. At the end of this month, I intend to shut down the server and archive the GitHub project. I will be moving on to other projects in my life, and I feel it is only right to formally end the project rather than leaving it in a state of limbo like so many other game engines. I enjoyed the time that I spent on both the RPG Toolkit and the RPGWizard, and I would like to thank everyone that has supported the project throughout the years. Swordmaster. This was pretty sad news for me to read, as well as for many others in this small community, because I looked forward to being able to utilize a version of what I knew to be RPG Toolkit in a more modern form. The games that you make in RPG Toolkit may or may not run on today's platforms, but RPGWizard is a contemporary fork of that engine, and so the things that you make in this engine should work. And RPG Toolkit was pretty complete in and of itself already. It had a lot of things that RPG Maker did not itself gradually take on or incorporate into its feature loadout until many, many years later in some cases. RPG Maker MZ, the newest version of RPG Maker, now has 8 graphical layers, and RPG Toolkit had that back in 2000. So Maker's about 20 years late in that ballpark. Now, just to give you some insight on what RPGWizard actually does, let's look at its features page on its official website. RPGWizard provides an integrated environment for creating 2D RPGs with an emphasis on being completely programmable with a unified JavaScript API. Unlike many other popular RPG engines, RPGWizard is focused on code, providing you with the means to create truly unique games. Every event in RPGWizard is written in JavaScript, giving you the ability to customize them as much as you want. It doesn't force you into only using a small number of built-in events. As RPGWizard uses standard JavaScript, one of the most popular programming languages in the world, you are able to leverage a massive amount of resources, everything from libraries, tutorials, books, IDEs, and more. Even with a strong emphasis on coding, RPGWizard still comes with a visual editor for creating and organizing game assets common to most RPG games. Numerous asset editors are included, covering everything from maps, characters, enemies, animations, etc., making it easy to quickly build up your game's world. And there is an ever-growing list of built-in events being added to the editor to cover the most common use cases. RPGWizard's main target platform is currently desktop-based games with an aim in future to provide for even more platforms such as mobile. Now, sadly, this is null and void now, but currently it offers the same unified experience across both Windows and Linux without having to worry about platform specifics. I created a project in RPGToolkit that I never got to properly eulogize, but it was called ESM. It was based on this digital version of myself and my friends in this chat program that I used to frequent called Excite Virtual Places, and everybody that made any kind of impact on the chat room, any kind of daily regular, was a character in my game. For better or for worse, I was the jerk who took everybody and made them into a character. All of my friends were people who were playable, who you could go and recruit and get into your party, and all the people that I didn't really care for were bosses, mid-bosses, and the like. But it had a really epic story, and maybe one day I'll get to return to that project, but I feel like I'll probably want to do that, just to combat boredom after I retire. The reason that I'm making the video about RPGWizard is because I would like to give it some pomp and circumstance. I know the creator is leaving this project, but the project should still be able to be downloaded. I believe it will still be accessible, and it is something that I encourage everybody who's interested in studying RPG engines to go check out. It might not be something that you can take and, well, I want this feature, and that's fine. It's going to be done. It is done now. You should go check it out, though, with no particular expectation. Play around in it and see if it can address some of the things that you would like to do using RPG middleware. Who knows? You may begin learning RPG code, the platform's proprietary code environment, and it might influence you to learn programming the same way that it did me. Now, as far as the comments about the game engine ecosystem, I personally believe, and this is something I'm going to elaborate on a lot more with a little bit more reasoning for you to understand if you so wish, that there is no such thing as a game engine that does not have a purpose. There is no such thing as a game engine out there now that can't do something that one of the other engines or any of the other engines cannot, or rather can do. Put simpler, every single engine has a niche case that only it can serve, and I believe with every fiber that this engine is no different. There may be better engines, but the reality of it is that those engines are only better for specific projects. You as a game developer, whether you are using a bare bones platform in which you have to code, or you're using something that uses nodes and it has a lot of framework specifically for you to prototype things rapidly, or if you're using a very obvious accessible middleware that has a lot of overhead like RPG Maker, all of these things address different developer needs, and as soon as you create a project, you have a specific set of needs that you decide with your powerful abilities whether or not to compromise and what you absolutely have to have met in order for your vision to become reality. I want to thank the crickets in the background. I'm sure if they're not audible, that they are completely ruining the quality of my audio. It would sound good, guys. Trust me, it would sound great. I promise. I promise. It would sound so good without the cricket. But I think that this would have been a lot. I think this would have been really, really exciting to continue following and seeing what else it could do. And I do plan on making games in as many engines as possible, if for no other reason, for this channel, and making tutorials and the like for anything I can get my hands on. And this was no different, because to to me, this was RPG Toolkit, but modern. But I do understand the reasons behind wanting to move on and go into other projects and not having the same motivation for creation. It happens to game developers. I can only imagine that happens to engine developers as well. Stay tuned. I would love to show you all kinds of game engines that you haven't seen before. Maybe show you some ones that you have seen. And show you what they're able to do now. I love doing that kind of stuff, and that's the kind of stuff that I want to do on this channel. And I'd love to empower you, the creator, by showing you different tools, assets, resources, and also promoting the projects that you make. So let me know if you've got any suggestions or anything in particular you'd like me to look at, whether you created it or not, and I'll get back in touch with you. So thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you thought. Comments below if you want. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.